Hello and welcome back to the political panel show that unites not just the usual political yackers, but the rare political antelopes and gazelles who are eager to prove they are not even mad. Today we speak of Trump and Russia, but not Ukraine's plan to end the war in Ukraine. And we also talk about the trials, or lack thereof, of Eric Adams. As we do so, we promise to uphold our reputation for refutation, while at the same time vowing to be not even mad. I've used the pronoun we. I think that's still allowed in Trump's America, but who are we? Dan Savage is the writer behind the sex advice column Savage Love and the podcast Savage Love. And he's also celebrating 20 years of Hump. Okay, that's what is that about your personal life, as most things are, Dan?
No, Hump is an amateur porn film festival where each film is 5 minutes or less, and it's really fun and really crazy. HumpFilmFest.com, and it's Savage Lovecast, not Savage Love, the podcast. Savage Love.
You know what? I think I took that off your YouTube description. So just a note for you.
Okay,
I will correct that. Savage Lovecast.
Touche.
And Noam Dworman is the owner of the Comedy Cellar, host of the Live from the Table podcast, and the most stalwart American opponent of congestion pricing's impact on the common man and woman. Noam, welcome to Not Even Mad.
Oh, thank you, Mike. But you heard just the headline just like 15 minutes ago. Trump canceled it.
Tell me. Well, yes, this is true. So it worked. What you're saying is it worked.
Maybe, yeah.
Congestion pricing certainly was working. There were a lot fewer cars in Lower Manhattan.
Here we go. All right.
A lot more pedestrians and a lot more
I know
foot
we
traffic.
promised to be not even mad, but go ahead.
I'm actually mad. Like I'm here under false pretenses, Mike. I agreed to be on the show, but I'm like fucking furious all the time right now.
Yeah, they should have raised it to $100, and they'd have 0 cars in Manhattan. Go ahead.
I'm for that. I'm for no cars at all anywhere. Bring back horse and buggy.
This will be an exercise if we could start off in a place of total disagreement and see what we agree on. But, if things get boring, we'll bring back congestion pricing. No one cares a little bit about Israel, but he cares a lot about congestion pricing, I should say.
Very much.
So you won. Does it feel good? Does it feel good to have a win?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Well, I'm concerned that it's not legal. I'm on vacation. I haven't followed the arguments. It seems like a state can choose its own tolls, but maybe because part of it comes from the Hudson River, maybe that becomes an interstate issue. But then the federal government has to consent. But then is it revocable? I don't know. I don't think we've heard the last of this. It's going to be probably a court case.
So that's one of those court decisions that the Trump administration will find itself in. Okay,
and
let's talk about
small government and local control. More past Republican positions just thrown onto the bonfire with, international alliances and free trade, everything else that Trump has burned to the ground, including now small government, local control, letting New York make decisions for New York.
Well, let's talk about New York, because at least 7 prosecutors have resigned, whether then obey Emile Bove's orders to drop charges against New York City's mayor, Eric Adams. He faced 5 counts and more were coming on corruption. It was taking upgrades on hotels and airplanes for official favors. A heroine in all this is Danielle Sassoon, who by all accounts is a conservative, a tried and true former clerk of Antonin Scalia. But she and the others just said that this was a political quid pro quo. And I have to say the Trump administration is kind of proud of that. It would seem they paraded Eric Adams on Fox and Friends alongside border czar Tom Homan, who essentially said, now I'm going to get him to do for us what I want him to do for us. The governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, could remove him. Should she? This is a question for, specifically New Yorker Noam Dworman. What do you think?
No, I don't think she should remove him. I think that these procedural steps, all the lawfare, none of it ever works. It seems to backfire. There's a. Am I wrong that the primary is coming up in June?
Right.
So it's only a few months. But most importantly, people elect Adams for certain policies, and more than the personality of the mayor. I think it's important to respect the voters' choice on what policies and kind of the general approach they want, which with Mayor Adams is kind of a right-wing Democratic approach, tough on crime, whatever it is. She's going to substitute her judgment for the judgment of the people on how they want the general approach to government to be in the city at a time when there's nothing urgent. I mean, he was indicted however long ago, and he was just as corrupt then as he is now, and she didn't feel any urgent need to remove him. So I think that it would be a mistake. I understand the issue, but no.
Yeah, I agree with you. I am extremely hesitant to thwart and essentially disenfranchise the people. There is an election coming up, but you could take that question if Hochul should intervene, Dan, or you could just talk about the charges against him and what you thought of Trump intervening and suspending them, not making them go away, but suspending them like a sword of Damocles.
All right, the voters voted for Adams in the last election. Voters also voted for Hochul. And there's also a political system in New York that allows and empowers the governor to remove a corrupt or compromised mayor, which Adams is. And here's what I think is urgent. I think it's urgent that Democrats be seen doing fucking something, doing anything, exercising what power they might actually have. And so when I read Hakeem Jeffries saying, refusing to call for Eric Adams' resignation or removal, instead calling on Adams to show that he has the capacity to continue to govern in the best interest of New Yorkers. This kind of mealy-mouthed, hand-wringing bullshit from the Democrats who continue to signal to voters by Hochul not doing what she could do at this moment, that Democrats, liberals, like Bob Dole used to say, are folks who won't take their own side in an argument, who show up at the knife fight with a covered dish, like Bill Maher says. It, even if you think it is not a power that she should exercise, what we've seen from Republicans over the last decade, longer, with McConnell and the Supreme Court and every goddamn thing Trump is doing right now, is the raw exercise of power. And that has earned, to some extent that I don't quite understand, the respect of a majority of American voters. And Democrats need to start erring on the side of the raw exercise of the powers that they possess. And Hochul should have removed Adams instantly after this quid pro quo agreement with the Trump administration was made public. It is bald-faced corruption. He's got to go. And you don't say, well, there's, an election in 6 months. Like, your husband is beating you now. You gotta, if you can leave now. You gotta go. And even if for no other reason than just voters seeing Democrats throw a punch, do a thing, not study, not consider, not check in with all the goddamn stakeholders, but actually do a thing, I think she should do the thing. I think Democrats got to start doing the thing, whatever the thing is.
I definitely agree with your criticism of Hakeem Jeffries. I used to think he was good. I used to think he was a strategic politician, but now maybe he is a strategic or overly strategic politician. Every time I see him on the news, and he just did an interview with Jon Stewart, and he somewhat embarrassed himself because that phrase you used, mealy-mouthed, he is just either constitutionally unable or unwilling to come out and say the thing. And so, like I just said, I don't think they should throw, and I think it's going way too far, and you could create own goals by, quote, doing something. But in that statement, Jeffries didn't even call on him to resign. And that's an easy one because he's not going to do it. But at least you look like you're saying, I call on him to resign. Then the ball's on his court.
But it signals weakness. I'm calling on you to do a thing that we actually have the power to make you do, but we're not going to exercise that power to make you do it. We're just going to implore you to do that thing. Like, Democrats got to stop being such mealy-mouthed bags of slop and do some things that they can actually do. And what we've seen with Trump, I'll finish real quick. What we've seen with Trump over and over again is own goals are bad unless you have 100 of them at once, in which case no one can wrap their heads around them. Trump has a lot of own goals out there that we never even get around to addressing. So, like, Dems do things, including this thing, but do a bunch of other fucking things too.
Yeah,
Sorry.
No, it's okay. The problem with the debate we're having is I can't see this in terms of a partisan issue, and it's just not my approach to it. I'm thinking in terms of principle here, and seeing both sides just allow principles to rot in terms of, like you say, they need to do something. They need to show power, something. But if you're on the other end of it, you would say, well, how can they defend that? That's not the way you do things, by just trying to show your power. There's an election. You don't overturn the people's decision on an election, except for the most extreme, 100% purely proven scenario where you have evidence of a quid pro quo. Yeah, bring charges if you can prove it. It's a few
They
months
admitted
away.
it on Fox News.
They
All
admitted
the
what?
evidence you need is the quid pro quo.
What
When
was,
Adams
what was the quid and what was the pro quo?
The quid was, we will drop these charges. We will force the Justice Department to drop these charges in exchange for you assisting in going after illegal immigrants in New York City.
But he's
Who-
supposed to do
who-
that
They
anyway.
admitted it. They unpacked it on Fox News.
Who's they? Who admitted it? Mayor
It was
Adams
Tom
admitted it?
Homan, the border czar. He was
And
there-
Adams.
What
Yeah,
did they say?
they
I
were-
don't know about this.
Well, they were sitting right next to each other, and Homan embarrassed Adams essentially and saying, now we're going to have a partner in our crackdown. And I think it's a substantive crackdown to some degree, but I think it's mostly the optics of the crackdown. And this really helps. Now we have the mayor of America's biggest city who's going to insist on the crackdown. But as Sassoon wrote in her letters, and it's just logic would dictate, he has to follow the law anyway. And everyone this side of Brandon Johnson, who is really, really, really liberal and makes noises about not assisting with ICE, like there's only so much that a mayor can do. And as you pointed out, he was elected essentially to be a conservative. He is a Democrat. Sometimes I see the news talking about Hochul and Adams, and they say, and Hochul's fellow Democrat. I'm like, these two are not fellows. They're members of the same party, because up until recently, you couldn't get elected in New York otherwise.
So let me just say. So I mean, Adams has already expressed pretty right-wing views on immigration, on the migrants, and all that. The federal government, the president, does have the right to prioritize his policies over a prosecution. If he thinks, listen, this is not the time to try to remove the mayor right now. We have bigger fish to fry with a cooperative mayor on our policies. That's okay. If there's an actual, deal struck where you can prove something, then sure, investigate it legally, and you can put people under oath, and you can discover, and you can try to find out what it is. But the eagerness to do something, to get even, to use the law, this is just blown up in the Democrats' face. It's the reason Trump is president now. It's just a bad idea. It's till June. You think it's so important to bring him out before June?
Up at the Democrats' face is cringing weakness. You decried partisanship, and it's almost as if you decry violence when the person getting the shit beat out of him begins to fight back. Like, we live in a very deeply divided partisan moment where the Republicans are using, in corrupt ways and in ways that they are legally allowed to, but violating long-established norms, all the levers of power that they possibly can, throwing every punch they possibly can. And what Democrats see, or what voters see, average voters who are only half paying attention until an election rolls around, is Democrats not exercising the powers that they can exercise. And I'm sorry, what Adams has done is, you don't leave somebody who robbed the store in charge of the store until it works its way through the legal system, whether they robbed the store. He robbed the store. He's got to go.
But that wasn't true months ago when he was charged. They don't, or governors don't remove every simply charged or indicted official. And that's an important principle for the governor not to be the one to issue justice. But I will say something about what you said, Noam, which is, yeah, it's true in general as a principle, the president has his priorities on immigration enforcement, but it is not true, and Sassoon pointed this out in her letter, it is not true that a viable, reasonable, or even legal reason to drop charges can be to advance one's political agenda. Even if the political agenda is right, and even if the political agenda is legitimate. That is the quid pro quo. You can only drop charges if there is evidence that the charges won't stick, or that
He's already
they
been
were
indicted.
fraud.
Hold on, Mike,
They have to give the
Julie,
judge's
hold on.
permission to drop the charges.
Hold on, that's your opinion. That's her opinion. I don't know where I come down on that, but I know enough about the theory of the unitary executive to know that there's very smart people who would disagree with her opinion on that. I'm making a more a deeper point, which is that these hot-blooded urges have made the country worse, have backfired very often on the people who began them. We have a few months to go here. Forbearance is nothing to be ashamed of. New York can replace this guy without normalizing yet a new anti-democratic exercise of power where the governor removes the mayor because she gets a whiff of something she doesn't like, as if we haven't seen backroom deals struck, quid pro quos struck a million times before and other matters. I am no fan of Eric Adams. I do think this deal stinks to high heaven. I don't like any of it one bit, but removing the mayor is a big deal. And I don't, and especially when there are, if you are right that it's a crime was committed here, they can bring a criminal investigation.
But what they're getting is we won't bring that criminal investigation.
Well, that's up to them.
So long as you cooperate with Trump's
state,
corrupted Justice Department.
The state of New York can investigate Mayor Adams. They don't have to remove him. They can investigate him. They can put him under oath.
On the legal issue, as Sassoon says in her letter, that there are only two reasons to drop charges. And one is evidence that the evidence isn't clear or that the truth of the matter has, or the prosecutor's understanding of the truth of the matter has changed. And the other is because of something that Bove was talking about, charging, dismissing, or recharging. Sorry. The government may, without leave of court, dismiss an indictment if it's prompted by considerations contrary to the public interest, such as if you were harassing or there was overcharging of the indicted. I don't think, and as Sassoon points out, I don't think either of those apply. I just don't think as a matter of law this should be permissible. I mean, it's allowed.
I'm not sure she's saying that as a matter of law. She might be saying it as a matter of Justice Department policy or
she's also citing that she has a duty of candor to the court, and she's also citing other policy which says that political considerations cannot be taken into account. So whatever.
I think she's a hero for resigning. That's great.
She is in the right, and dropping the charges or holding them over him, it doesn't even matter if it was for some great political reason. That is improper. That is an improper consideration. That is a matter of principle. I think leads us to a lot worse places than keeping the charges in place and letting him stand for office. And perhaps as a final word on this, I think Eric Adams is right when he said, and he said this in defiance of the calls to resign, quote, "I'm not going anywhere." But I think that also applies to his chances in the election. He has a few months more in office, and then we will all be done.
Look, there's half the country, rightly or wrongly, who believes that the Biden Justice Department was politically motivated. They certainly have evidence of this in other matters, and they have bought this story, which I don't personally believe. Not that I know the details of it, and not that I think it's impossible, but I find it very unlikely that they were went after Adams because they didn't like the fact that he was playing footsie with Trump on immigration. So there's many, many people out there, half the country, who believes this narrative. And then when they see, and they have some reason from previous cases to believe that the narrative is possible. And then they see now when this flips and then Hochul removes the mayor, it just adds to their worldview that, anything is fair game if they do it. And so what is to be gained? There's nothing to be gained except you'll feel good about it.
I want to challenge you to identify a couple of things.
What will be gained?
Wait.
What will be gained?
There's a couple of things that Trump has done that confirm what liberals and progressives fear about Trump that you think he should not have done. Akin to the removing of the mayor, dropping all the charges against himself.
Wait, what Trump shouldn't have done? I think the January 6th pardons were. I mean, by the way, I would say with the January 6th pardons and with let me answer your question. I'm going to answer. That it all stinks to high heaven. It's a disgrace, and to open-minded people like me, who is not beyond my ability to believe that some of the people on January 6th were overcharged or they threw the book at them or whatever it is. The responsible way to do it is you issue a document giving some bullet point arguments for each and every person that was pardoned, especially the people who were pardoned after tussling with the police and with Mayor Adams. They should give details as to why they think these charges are spurious. I'm all with. There's nothing about the way Trump's handled it which I will defend. I am just saying this tit for tat escalation has not worked after 8 years of it. We've seen it already. It hasn't worked. It's not going to work this time. As a citizen of New York, I know that we have a primary coming up in June where the guy's likely to be tossed out, and we'll have our norm in place that a governor does not, because the Democrats have to do something, overturn an election.
They do. I'm sorry, it's all tit, no tat. Like,
Okay.
It's all tit from the Republicans and no tat from the Democrats. Like, Democrats got to get off.
This is 100% partisan take on something that's a matter of principle.
We live in 100% partisan, deeply divided times, and we got to
should-
show up to the fight we're actually having and not the fight we wish we were having, or telling Democrats constantly that Democrats exist to set a good example for Republicans, which has gotten us to where we are now.
Do tell me, though, honestly, what do you think will be gained by removing him, and what do you think will be lost by not removing him?
I think the gain is the communication to voters, into their reptile brains, that Democrats can and will exercise authority and power. Donald Trump is all about the politics of dominance and power and the violation of norms. So I think even if you can make an argument that this isn't how it should have happened, just the fact that it did happen, that Democrats actually did something, pulled a lever that they had the power to pull, sends a signal that makes whatever risks are attendant on that move worth assuming. Because the problem with Democrats right now is perceived weakness by the voters, and Democrats need to throw some punches.
Are you saying at a national level in New York? New York is a one-party state. You're talking about a national level, like New York. Okay, we read about what's going on in New York politics all over the country.
So
you want to bring the removal of Mayor Adams into the service of national Democratic politics, and I'm saying, as a citizen of New York, I think that's out of bounds.
Well, also, I don't think that the Democratic governor removing the democratically elected mayor, a black man, will map onto the thirst for Democrats to have retribution against Republicans. I think it will create
one of the beefs
a lot of
against
chaos.
Democrats is that Democrats can't even run the states that Democrats run.
Well, that's
Democrats
true.
aren't even like running the states where they have the trifecta,
Or the cities.
and the cities where they have the trifecta.
Well, that's true.
So allowing people to see Democrats like holding other Democrats accountable and taking care of their own shit, I think sends a good message.
I don't think Democrats, if what they're trying to do is stand up to Republicans, criticizing other Democrats, sometimes to the left of them, sometimes not, I don't think that that's the way to get a lot of credence or credibility from the public. I mean, this is
I don't
6
think
months
Adams
away.
is a credible
6
Democrat
months away to
anymore,
the
not
election.
after that performance on Fox News.
Can I give-
shoving his
can I give-
tongue
can I-
and entire head up Donald Trump's ass.
I want to ask Dan a question because it's related, unless you want to take it away from this, Mike. Let's say congestion pricing. You know, Hochul suspended congestion pricing in like August or whenever it was, September, whatever it was that she suspended it. And she said it's suspended until further notice.
Until further review, right?
No,
Until the people who went up to her.
indefinitely. It was suspended indefinitely. That was, and then immediately after the election, she reinstated it. So what we have here was obvious look under the kimono that they just didn't want to go into the election with congestion pricing, that they planned to instate it all along, that they waited until, so they took a total end run around the voters. And this is where I say, like, let's not pretend here. That's a different kind of corruption. It's not illegal. But to me, it's dirty as hell. And it feels more dirty to me because she pretended that this was off the table. And it was really because she didn't want to face the voters. And it's supposed to be a decision for the voters because the voters don't want it. So you're sort of for democracy, but you're also okay with the governor imposing a policy that you agree with, even if 70% of the people are against it, right? So it's like, come on.
Sometimes our leaders have to lead. There are cities that have done away. There's a city in Europe that banned cars from the entire city center. It'd be like banning cars entirely under 52nd Street in Manhattan. And it was opposed by 80% of the voters. And now it is supported in that same city, Ljubljana, by 80% of the voters. Sometimes people got to see what the change is before they embrace the change. A majority of Americans, after the passage of Obamacare, were against Obamacare, wanted it repealed because change is scary. And a majority of Americans now support Obamacare and do not want it repealed.
Yeah,
so sometimes they got to, but you know what? I agree with you.
That's Trump's argument.
I agree with you that Hochul it was bullshit for her to suspend the enactment for the bald-faced, transparent, and everybody called it at the time, political reasons that she did, suspending the congestion pricing coming into force. Everybody knew it was about congressional elections. Everybody said so at the time.
Presidential election, too.
Well, it's about the Dems trying to get control of the House, and they came pretty close. And yeah, oh my God, this politician played politics with this film at 11. But I think it was bullshit. I think you're right to call it out. It was bullshit. And it did deprive voters of okay, here's congestion pricing. If you're pissed about it, you can vote some Dems out of office. And she kind of took that off the table, but kind of not, because everybody could see that this was not exactly hidden under the kimono. This was flapping in the wind.
No, actually, I met with her assistant at a party right after it happened, and she was like, "Yeah, we decided it's a bad idea." I mean, there was no.
That's
hint.
what they said.
Yeah.
They said, well,
$9.
$9.
That's what I was reading about New York politics on the other side of the country, which is covered everywhere. It's not what I was reading.
Anyway, there's no limiting principle.
About Hochul's motivations.
There's no limiting principle to any of this, and I say pox on all their houses.
Let's go from one highly contested area, Manhattan below 60th Street, to another slightly less contested, Ukraine, the Donbas region, and we'll be back in a minute with more of Not Even Mad. We're back with Not Even Mad. We have two gentlemen who host their own podcast that occasionally get into politics, but I knew that they were politically minded because I've talked to them a lot, not even on their podcast. They are Dan Savage and Noam Dworman. And in this segment, I'd like to talk about the impending peace deal for Ukraine. Russia and the United States are meeting in Saudi Arabia. Guess who's not there? It's Ukraine. Vladimir Zelensky is not involved. Donald Trump has referred to him as a dictator, says he has 4% approval ratings. That is right out of the Russian misinformation playbook. Zelensky, in turn, said, and I think accurately, that Donald Trump lives in a disinformation space. But beyond the tit for tat, again, to bring back that phrase, beyond the tit for tat, what about ending the war in Ukraine? Is this good for the United States' interests? Is this good for Donald Trump's view of the world, just looking at it like he does and like Pete Hegseth does? I know one party that it's good for, and that is the Russians. Dan, what do you think about this? Because I'm pretty sure where Noam is, but I'm not sure where you are on war, continuing to spend billions of American dollars to continue a war that probably, if we're being honest, can't be won, as Zelensky would define it.
It's above my pay grade. I'm a humble sex advice columnist.
So give me the sex angle on this.
I do want to toss out there quickly. In the last segment, we were both raising our voices, but I am not mad.
That's good.
This is like my family at Christmas and Thanksgiving. We argue at that volume, and so no, I'm not pissed or anything.
And analogize it to sexual harassment and assault. Go ahead.
I think, I don't know. I don't think as we back out of NATO, as we betray our European allies, as we end the Atlantic Alliance that kept the peace in Europe, at least for 80 years, coming on the heels of our betrayal of the Kurds, coming on the heels of our betrayal of our other betrayal. I just don't like anyone who ever trusts the United States of America ever again. And obviously, Ukraine is the victim here. And for Trump to get on his obnoxious, grifty social media platform and blame Ukraine, which was invaded, for starting this war, because I guess it didn't lay down and grab its ankles when Vladimir Putin told it to, is obscene. And this is obscene. And everything Zelensky has said about if we don't win this, it's not over. That the Baltic states are in peril, Poland is in peril, that Russia's ambitions and Russia's meddling in other democracies and in Europe don't extend to just Ukraine's borders. And appeasing a dictator, and oh my God, I can't even be articulate about it. Like the gaslighting and the Darvo about calling Zelensky the instigator and calling Zelensky a dictator and trying to pin the blame for this, the victimization of the Ukrainian people, on Zelensky is just, it's obscene. And no one will ever ally with or trust the United States ever again. Our word means squat.
No.
Well, Mike, I'm tempted to ask you what you think, Mike. You want my answer first, but this is complicated. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I appreciate the fact that the main frame of these decisions is not that Donald Trump is in the pocket of Putin, because I know that 4-5 years ago, it would be impossible to get away from that narrative. And I just don't think that's what's going on. I literally don't think Donald Trump is a Putin stooge or Putin agent. So let's think of it.
I'm a P-tape truther. It's out there.
Even so, that's not, if we adhered to that as the explanation, we'd be not understanding what really is going on. And what really is going on are all the things we know about Donald Trump being transactional and being quote unquote America first, but certainly being adverse to being ripped off in foreign entanglements or what is usually called alliances. But he's so unbelievably short-sighted. And it's not just out of goodness, it's out of strategy that we have alliances, that we support states like Ukraine, that we support properties like U.S. aid, which I can understand why if they have a trans opera in Colombia, that will invoke his ire. But you just have to look at the Chinese. What do the Chinese think about the U.S. getting out of, say, U.S. aid? Are they saying, I can't, this is a setback for us because the United States was just wasting its money? No, the Chinese are very happy that the United States is getting out of U.S. aid because it opens the ground diplomatically for them. What are the Chinese, our other great adversary and our more potent adversary behind the Russians? What do they think of Donald Trump essentially giving the Russians everything they want with Ukraine? They like it. They like the march against NATO and the march against the West. And not just as a concept, but as the United States' self-interest. Because I do think that there will be a deal. It will not at all be in Ukraine's favor. Sure, a couple 100,000 Russians went to their deaths, and maybe I'll give Trump some credit for noting that all the time, but this was certainly the fault of Putin, and tens of thousands of Ukrainians went to their deaths, and there'll be less death in the short term, literally in Donald Trump's term, but there won't be a peace. There's never any attention to detail, and Russia's going to take over more and more of Ukraine and eventually settle Poland, and if Donald Trump adheres to elections, which I think he will, it will be somebody else's problem.
Yeah, just like Russia settled Poland when Stalin and Hitler divided it up.
So let me say, and I don't, there's just various things, various threads that come to mind on this whole issue. First of all is the echoes of this nasty anti-Ukraine Tucker Carlson attitude disturb me, where Tucker Carlson has this hateful Zelensky, sweaty and rat-like, and the way all that kind of weird libertarian group of people seems to hate Ukraine with this passion, as if they were the cause of all this, even though they say the United States provoked the war. These Ukrainians had the nerve to want to stay free, right? They called themselves libertarian. So this hate,
yeah, that really does have actual sexual harassment elements. Ukraine was asking for it.
Yeah. So this hateful attitude, and then this buying into the fact that they're Nazis, even though you can look at any protest of the Maidan Revolution and you're not going to see a single Nazi expression there or anti-Semitic expression. To see this coming out of Trump's mouth is very, very disturbing. That's number one. But number two is, as opposed to like in early 2023, when we all kind of thought, Ukraine might just pull this off. And there was that general, was then Prigozhin, who started a mutiny against Putin, and maybe Putin will get thrown out, and maybe it'll turn this around. I think most people at this point think that it's not going Ukraine's way, and actually time is on Russia's side, not on Ukraine's side. So that you have to sober up about that, because just like people in business don't get out until they've lost their house and their car and every dollar they have, and they finally say, oh yeah, I guess I am going bankrupt. Nations do the same things in war. And number three, though, if you really zoom out, and I'm very upset to hear the way Trump is talking, if you really zoom out, say, well, we have no real leverage against Russia here, but we have carrots. And the carrot is to allow Russia to maintain its self-respect, to keep NATO off its doorstep and have the rump state of Ukraine stay as some kind of neutral thing. So Poland doesn't have Russia on its, Poland and NATO don't have Russia on its eastern border, and Russia doesn't have NATO on its western border. And then if our big fish to fry is China, Well, I would imagine that we want a good relationship with Russia vis-a-vis China. To have Russia as an enemy for the rest of our lives is not helpful to our number one priority, which is not Russia, it's China. And we're throwing Russia into China's arms indefinitely, as long as we're going to maintain this intense Cold War with Russia. And I imagine at some point that is the conversation that people like Rubio and Kellogg are having that allows them to play ball here. I don't know.
It feels like I agree with you. The time is on Russia's side here, but the longer it drags on, the more Russia bleeds out. And who knows? Like, there was the mutiny that we all thought for 5 minutes might be the downfall of Putin. We don't know what could happen 6 months from now. We do know that if there's a peace imposed on Ukraine, or if Russia takes all of Ukraine, we're all going to have to sit back so that we have a better relationship with Russia vis-a-vis our conflict with China, and watch Ukraine intellectuals and political leaders and politicians be rounded up into Russian concentration camps. Russia had lists of Ukrainian intellectuals and politicians and writers to round up and arrest and eliminate, which is what Russia did when they took over half of Poland in 1938. And we're just going to sit back and watch that happen and do nothing about it.
So let me ask you a question. So the flip side policy would be to give Ukraine all those arms, like really give them everything that they would need to maybe turn this around, that the Biden administration was reluctant to give them because they didn't know how this could pan out. So the question is, if Ukraine finally gets to the point where they can start making inroads on Russian territory, whatever it is, are we sure this won't end in the ultimate disaster, a tactical nuclear weapon? Like, how far are you ready to go with this risk? Because that's the heavy decisions they're facing in the White House, and I don't know the answers to that.
But then what is the geopolitical consequence of your position? Is that any state with nuclear arms, because they can threaten the use of nuclear arms, gets to do whatever it wants, invade whatever neighbor they want, and it's the end of the international rules-based order. Like, okay, so we're all hostage to every nuclear armed state. France can do whatever it wants. France can invade Spain.
But we even capitulated to the Russians in the Cuban Missile Crisis. You're absolutely right. This is a very, very dicey situation. So J.D. Vance says, essentially, Russia's going to keep some portion, of, if not all of the territory that it's conquered. And then we're going to need real security guarantees for the rest of Ukraine. And we have military and economic sanctions at ready to enforce that if necessary. Listen,
what about the military or economic sanctions are going to force Russia's hand after this bullshit deal that didn't force Russia's hand before this bullshit deal?
Yeah, it comes down to this. If you really think that Ukraine can beat Russia, then I guess you're against any deal.
No, I don't think that has to be the criteria. Because you deal with a nuclear state, it doesn't mean you capitulate to anything. In fact, the way the Biden administration played it was a little annoying because they gave every missile system, but they gave it too late and they gave it with a lot of foot dragging. And I don't even think that was strategy. I think that's just how they acted. But they got the HIMARS and they got the F-15s, and they really did push Russia back and fought them and killed 100,000 Russians. So that proves that you don't have to capitulate to every Russian state, but you do have to deal with them carefully. And so far, I think the United States has. Another category error that I think we make is to think that while it is true we want, quote unquote, want good relations with the Russians, that is not the end and that is not the strategy. That is the means to get something. Now, I know you're saying what that could get us is better leverage with the Chinese. I just don't think that is in the offing. The Chinese want to be more than a regional power. Russia wants to reassert its sphere of influence. These are two things that are fundamentally at odds with the interest of America and Americans. And therefore, quote unquote, good relations with the Russians not only ain't going to happen, but isn't in America's interest. If good relations means exactly what we're doing, which is negotiating this peace deal by looking at the Russian wish list, giving them their first 5 issues, and then going further and trying to ask the Ukrainians for mineral wealth and economic concessions that the Telegram and other outlets are saying are more than the United States asked after World War II. So I just think in general, you can fight the Russians, you can make them pay costs. The way I look at it is, So far, the war has cost us $175 billion. So 330 million Americans, that's about $500 each. It's kind of the best $500 I've spent in the last few years.
And most of that money was spent in America. Like, we spent that money to buy arms from American arms dealers and manufacturers, factories in America, and shipped it over there. So it's not like the $500 per American disappeared into Ukraine. It actually was plowed back into America's economy.
We were weakening
it's war
Russia.
Economy that I think we should
that's
have
a good
less
point.
of,
We were
but
weakening Russia, and that is in the United States' interest, not because we're bad or we don't want good relations, but good relations with Putin and what he has explicitly said over and over again that he wants from the world. That is what the United States should stand athwart.
America tried to have good relations with Russia. George W. Bush cuddled Putin. Russia was welcomed into the G7. There was a real effort to find common ground and work with Russia, even as Putin dismantled.
And then they were thrown out, and now Trump wants them in, and so that brings up a good question that I want to ask. No,
you can't trust Putin. You can't trust Putin. We know
I think
that
that
from
you
experience.
can engage in this negotiation in a much different way than Trump is. If you look at what Trump is saying, isn't he starting off from a place of giving Putin everything he wants, exerting no leverage, which we do have on Putin? It does seem to me that this isn't some great negotiation which is going to get any concessions out of Putin.
Yes, and yes. So first of all, I just want to say, go back. I think that when anybody talks about what it's costing us, whether it's Israel, Ukraine, I think this is almost always bullshit. They use the money as an argument. They don't really care about the money. If it was something else, they wouldn't even mention the money. I don't care about the money we're spending to Ukraine. Just print more of it. It's hard to find somebody who answers the question, if we're going to go sit down with the Russians, what is our realistic goal here? Like my father used to say, you have to know what you want out of a situation before you go into a situation. And I think what they probably want is to let Russia have, status quo. The status quo is going to become the New Deal and work on somehow securing the rest of Ukraine so that they won't take the rest. But as for the rest of it, Mike, what was the last thing you said? I wanted to answer. Was the very last thing you said?
I was asking you about negotiations and what Putin, if Trump should be doing something different.
By Trump, I was thinking, because I'm wondering the same thing as you, why is Trump giving away all these things before? And so it's either he's completely incompetent and just literally erratic and not even thinking straight, and the people around him, or they're in a position of weakness and they feel that the way to get Putin to agree to a deal, when Putin may be holding all the cards, is to give him what he wants and to make him feel that he won, that he's got Kissinger always used to talk about not humiliating Russia, that this is very important. I can't make heads or tails of it, but I was something just the overall thing. Last thing I'll say: years ago, I had your friend and my friend Fred Kaplan on the show when Russia was in Crimea. I was saying sanctions, 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 and I said, Fred, sanctions until Russia leaves Crimea are sanctions till the end of time, because Russia's never leaving Crimea, which means Russia and America are going to be at each other's throats forever. And I said, Fred, that's dangerous to the world. I remember saying that, and sure enough, here we are. And back then, if God forbid, if as you pointed out, Mike, if Trump had made any moves that way, people would have said, "You see, he's a Russian plant." But the fact is, it was dangerous to the world, and this is dangerous to the world. And we have to decide if we want this to go on indefinitely. I believe the Russians can wait this out another 5 years, but you don't know where this can lead. And
we have to make it. We have to make a judgment call about what's more dangerous to the world. The situation Russia's in now, where it for 3 years has not been able to win a war it predicted it would win, it thought it would win, that American intelligence thought it would win in 3 days, or a Russia that's gotten to be brought back into the world economic order, sanctions are lifted, is rearming, and clearly has imperialistic designs, not just on the rest of Ukraine, but parts of Europe that are members of NATO, the Baltic states,
But
Poland,
Dan,
Finland, and then what do we do?
Dan,
Like, which is worse,
Dan,
like the situation we're in now, or that situation that we may
but I'll
find
ask you a
ourselves in
question.
10 years when Russia's rolling over our allies, if we still have
Dan,
allies in Europe?
But Dan, I want to ask you a question. And this goes to like a certain kind of, this is going to sound like I'm insulting you, I'm not, but just like humility of having an opinion. The flip side of what you're saying is you're also going to take the risk that a year from now, Russia might indeed roll over all of Ukraine all the way to Poland. Like by allowing this to just go on, you're saying, you know what, I'm ready to take the risk that Russia will take all of Ukraine. And do you even have the expertise?
But the deal Trump is offering them is all of Ukraine.
No, he's not. Do you even have the expertise in your own mind to make that calculation and say, yes, I believe we should stay in it because I know enough about this and I'm confident that Russia won't take all of Ukraine. Whereas I'm saying, I don't know about this stuff. The Pentagon experts barely get this right, but I feel like it seems like this is a stalemate, and it is more conservative to say, listen, it's very unlikely we're gonna turn them out, but we can stop it here and preserve the other 80% of Ukraine, or we can roll the dice and maybe lose all of Ukraine. And it seems to me, from listening to the smart people, that the odds are very low that Ukraine is going to win this war, and much higher that if they stay in, they'll lose everything. And Putin may at this point be saying to himself, what do I need a deal for? I believe in a year I can take everything.
He hasn't been able to take it for 3 years. The lines haven't moved.
But he might really believe it.
You're saying he might take it in another year of fighting.
Yeah.
The risk is, and I'm not saying I know, or
it's
I
a
have
bigger, stronger
crystal
country.
ball, or I
They
know
have
better than
nuclear
smart people.
weapons. They have China.
But if Russia has a pause in the fighting where they get to rearm and rebuild, they're going to reinvade the rest of Ukraine. So either way, like the risk is that Ukraine will be lost to
not necessarily
Putin and Russian fascism and
not necessarily
Russia's
because
desire to exterminate Ukraine.
First of all, the rest of Ukraine is mostly Ukrainians, right? They're like they're the most anti-Russian of the population, and the ones yet to be taken. So Russia doesn't really, I would imagine, want them in Russia to be like a unhappy population. What they prefer is to know that they're defanged. They want to know that Ukraine will not become part of the Western orbit, that they'll stay somehow quasi-neutral. And that might be enough for Russia until eventually Putin's going to die. And then the next leader takes over. You kick the can down the road and you play for time and hope that things get better.
I don't think Putin looks at the Western Ukrainians as Western. I think he looks at Ukraine as not a real place. He looks at Ukraine as Russia, and so far everything that he's viewed as Russia, he thinks should be Russia. Also keep in mind that Ukraine pretty much controls Kursk, which is an area of Russia. So they have things to deal. It is not the case, first of all, it's not the case that the battle lines haven't moved. They move slowly and at great cost, but they have moved. And there are places to deal. There are wins that Russia is not giving up, like Crimea. And then there are areas of negotiation. I think Trump has started the negotiation from the point of Russia controls everything they claim to control. And this is the important part, I think, Noam, you were saying that in their negotiation, what the United States wants is to freeze Russia where they are and stop them from going forward. I don't know that the Trump administration cares about that. I do not know that the Trump administration cares about Kyiv. If you said Kyiv as a means to get to Gdansk, maybe they would have to say something. They are in NATO, but I really don't think they care a bit about if Russia gets into Kyiv, and I don't think they're the ones to craft the deal to stop that from happening. Anyway,
we don't know.
The Poles care.
No, I don't know, but I'll come back to the
Defer
calculation
Polls'
of
judgment
what
about this.
is being asked of me as an American is this de minimis contribution. As long as the Ukrainians are inspired to die to keep the Russians out, it's in our interest. So that's kind of a horrible, amoral thing to say. I'm not getting on my high horse. I'm saying amorally so, you go and die, Ukrainians. All I'll do is give you a couple of ducats to purchase you the missiles to make that happen.
You know, as we know, the Ukrainians themselves may not be thinking the most clearly about all this. I may be over my head here, but yeah, as long as the Ukrainians are ready to fight and die, but at the time when it finally comes that they're out of Ukrainians to fight and die, At that point, Russia will roll right over Ukraine all the way to Poland.
Yes, but that's not the situation
and-
now. They're far from that situation. I mean, they have troubles, but they have also done a lot in the war that has surprised a lot of people in terms of pushing the Russians back, especially in the beginning.
Ago.
They currently hold a chunk of Russian territory.
I will poll you two.
Yeah.
Would you not sit down at the table with Russia and make a deal?
Not without Zelensky.
That's a good answer. And I'd make a deal. I could make a deal, sure. Like if Putin says I'm leaving, that's a deal I would make.
Right.
But how much more like the Munich conference can this possibly get? Like people say, like history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. This is like a rhyme in a badly written song where they're just repeating the same words. Czechoslovakia was not at the conference in Munich where Czechoslovakia was handed to the Sudetenland was handed to Hitler, and Zelensky not to be at this conference, nobody from Ukraine to be at this conference where Russia and the United States are dividing up Ukraine and making decisions to impose a peace on Ukraine that Ukraine will reject. What then? Do we go to war with Ukraine because they will not swallow the shit that Trump is trying
I only
to
hope
feed
that
them?
Rubio gets involved and asserts himself, and Trump allows that to happen. And he says some more sensible things, and maybe the Ukrainians can, to some extent, get behind the idea of fewer of them dying.
Listen, I just don't like this shit show foreign policy. This has been always been my beef with Trump, and it's scary, and it caused a lot of anxiety, and you hope it turns out well. When you listen to people like McMaster and who've been interviewed, McMaster, Tillerson was out very early, but McMaster did a recent interview, and he kind of comforted me a little bit about how Trump is actually thinking about things. But I'm not going to defend Trump here at all. I just hope that they have a strategy. But the only thing I do want to say is that humans tend to be too late to accept the fact that what they would like, the outcome they would like, is no longer realistic. And they don't finally accept it until they've taken much more losses. Like I said, like any businessman who doesn't know when to get out of his business, it's a psychological trap. The Ukrainians must certainly be in it. They're only human. And even advocates of Ukraine to some extent. It's very tough to say, you know what, we're not going to win this one. I don't remember exactly when we came to it in Vietnam, when we came to it in Korea. I know when we came to it in Afghanistan, but this is not the first time.
But in Vietnam, we stopped fighting the Vietnamese, right? What we're saying is not we're going to stop fighting the Russians. We're ordering Ukraine to stop fighting the Russians.
But in retrospect, we wish we had stopped fighting the Vietnamese 5, 6, 7 years earlier, right? Because we always thought we could turn it around. That's what I'm saying. We didn't know when to get out. And if we got
so
out,
you're saying the Ukrainians might not.
All of
us not
knowing. The Ukrainians, the American people who support them. It's such a bitter pill that Russia will get the upper hand in this. We don't want to accept it.
On the other hand, I think we got out of Afghanistan too early, which is to say at all, and to great humanitarian crisis, and we could have stayed there like we do in Korea and have essentially a peaceful situation for them.
Well, and also it might have led to Russia invading Ukraine.
But you also can't fight the last peace, I guess.
The showing of weakness, as Dan's even alluded to, the showing of weakness is very risky. And Putin certainly looked at Biden and said, if I'm going to take Ukraine, this is the guy to do it on. No question about that.
How weak is Trump walking into negotiations and saying, my first move is give you everything you want? That's my opening salvo in our negotiations. Everything you want.
Don't hate Trump so much that you can't accept that foreign leaders are more scared of him than they were of Biden.
Yeah, but in this situation,
I'm a PJ truther. I think that's what's going on here.
I mean, Putin and Biden and arming the Ukrainians versus Trump and giving Biden what he wants. I mean, sure, strength, competence, energy, all that. But in terms of this specific situation, Biden represented a lot more potency than Trump did. Okay, let's move on. This might shock our listeners, but my guests can be disputatious, and they will, in fact, find things to irk and vex them. And that is good because we have a segment called the Goat Grinders. It's things that get our goats. It's things that grind our gears. And I'll take the host prerogative. I'll start. Not to be a broken record, I am against plastic straws. Sorry, I said that exactly wrong. Not to be a broken record or a vinyl record. I am against the forced imposition, which is to say the imposition of paper straws, and I supported Donald Trump's executive action doing away with them in government. On the show and in my Substack, I aired a 2018 interview I did with someone from the Lonely Whale. This was an activist named Dune Ives, and this was the group that started the war against paper straws, and she had a horrible theory of change. But the main public face was not Dr. Dune Ives. It was a guy named Adrien Grenier. Do you remember him, Dan or Noam? Do you know the name? He was the actor from Entourage who played, I think, Vince, the main guy from Entourage. So he was this actor trying to portray an actor, and he came off not terribly believable. I checked in with Adrien Grenier and what he's been doing in his career. I guess I owe it to myself to say it like Grenier. And he's been fine. He's been acting, whatever. He was the 8th lead in Devil Wears Prada. But he has not tweeted or said anything about plastic straws in a long, long time. His main Twitter activity, he supports some film and acting stuff, is to support Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So I guess it is true that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has an environmental component, the River Keepers, that was all good stuff. But I guess Grenier has made the calculation not to antagonize the Trump administration or just to give up his ideals, or maybe I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He realized that paper straws turn into mush in your mouth and don't work. But he has totally backed off being the public face of the plastic straw ban and instead dedicated his time to pro RFK Jr. support. He gets my goat.
I don't know why we're not banning straws entirely, plastic or paper, because I've seen Jesse Waters more than once on Fox News suggest there's something gay about a man using a straw. When Tim Waltz was photographed using a straw to drink a milkshake, Jesse Waters got on Fox and said, that's gay, basically, that's what a cocksucker does. And so you would think the Trump administration, which is anti-cocksucking, would be banning all straws.
You might find this ironic, but what I think is gay is a man using a dental dam with a woman. But go ahead.
that's so gay I wouldn't even do it.
Oh my God.
Right. Savage draws the line.
What kind of? That's so gay. Who does that? Anyway, go ahead.
Nobody. I was there when they began making dental dams in the 80s because everybody wanted to pretend that lesbians were at risk of HIV, and like literally nobody used.
Yeah, that was bad on a branding level, on a practical level. Like they don't really work. They're not fun.
Yeah.
No one giver or
wet,
receiver don't like them. Why not just write a nice note at that point rather than the dental dam?
Yeah.
Can any stimulus be felt on the other side?
It's like a condom.
Well, I assume so, because there are latex fetishes out there who wear complete coverage latex and still manage to have orgasms. But then
do they even need the other person in the room, or is it just the latex of the dental dam that gets them off?
I don't know. I'm not one of them. Yeah. But I'll ask them. I have them on my show.
You are a sex columnist. America's premiere. Dan, do you want to tell us your goat grinder?
Yes, they've launched a new pronoun. The pronoun industrial complex is still churning them the fuck out. Everyone, ladies and gentlemen, I give you mirror pronouns. Those are pronouns that match the pronouns of the person you're speaking with. For example, if you use they, them pronouns, you would also use they, them pronouns for someone who uses mirror pronouns. And I just want to say, when I saw mirror pronouns launch, I just thought, okay, Donald Trump just won a third term somehow. That we just need to, we have enough pronouns, we have enough neo-pronouns, like we could just give the pronoun thing a rest strategically, just like I think Hochul should strategically fire Adams to send a message. I think the LGBTQIA plus community, of which I am a constituent part, should give the generation of new pronouns and the imposition of new pronouns and the lecturing people about new goddamn pronouns a fucking rest.
So who starts, though?
It grinds my goat.
It does. Who starts with the mirror pronouns?
I don't know. And this is assuming a conversation where you're talking with someone and addressing each other in the third person, like you're two Bob Doles or Bob Dole looking in a mirror. Like, how the fuck does this work? In what situation do you use someone's pronouns to that person?
Right. And what if two people use mirror pronouns? Then it's just infinitely regressive.
I know they disappear into the space-time, into a black hole. They just go poof, which would be
I don't even
nice,
understand
actually.
what it means. Can you give me an example?
Well, if I used she, her pronouns and you used mirror pronouns, when I referred to you, I would use she, her. But somebody else who used he, him pronouns when referring to you would use he, him because you use mirror pronouns. You want whatever somebody else's pronouns are. You want to reflect their pronouns back to them. Why do we need this? What is this for? What purpose does it serve? Like, I get it. We need maybe a gender neutral pronoun. One.
Dan.
They, them, or Zer, but we don't need this, like, this Cambrian explosion of pronouns that nobody can keep track of or remember for 2 seconds.
What does it say about your party that you seem to love so much that something as ridiculous as this gains any traction whatsoever?
Well, this is not a platform plank in the Democratic. This was not voted on at the DNC or anything. This is just like a tiny corner that I shouldn't like pay any attention to. Like, I'm actually giving this legs by talking about it. It's just like the fever dreams and like obscure corners of the online queer discourse where this stuff is constantly percolating up. And like, it annoys me, so I talk about it. But like, this isn't, my party hasn't embraced this shit. My party embraced, to its fault and to its detriment, Latinx, but my party isn't out there advocating for mirror pronouns.
Do you ever have like a nightmare or wake up in a cold sweat and say to yourself, God, if we could have just said that trans women can't play in sports and that we should control the border, we would have won. And maybe even with Harris, and maybe like it's so within the Democratic Party's control, and they put everything on Trump, but it's their own horrible decisions, just horrible.
Yes, the trans women in sports. I said to the editor of a big lefty publication who asked me what I thought they should be covering, I said, this is a loser issue for Dems. I said this 2 years ago. And we need to figure out why and write about it and directly address it rather than just saying bigot, bigot, bigot. Like, why is this a loser issue? That's how we won gay marriage. That's what the Democrats
did on immigration too. Bigot, bigot, bigot.
Overwhelming opposition to gay marriage. And we turned that around, not by saying bigot, 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 but by engaging with the arguments. And I think the mistake that the trans movement has made, and I've said this on my own show, are things like trans women are women. Like, okay, but it's not a catechism. This isn't a religion. Everybody doesn't have to believe. And one of the ways we won gay marriage was by saying to people who thought we were going to hell, you can still think that. You don't have to say Jesus loves me, right? Like, I will never accept homosexuality. Okay, it's not a package on your porch. You don't have to sign for it. Just like, leave me the fuck alone. Yeah. But the trans movement adopted this posture of, you have to like chant with us the catechism. What? And that was a block that people stumbled.
But you also always,
what you want is to say to people, you can have your bigotry or your bias or your beliefs and sign off on our full civil equality. That's what the gay marriage movement did, to its credit and its success, and it's what the trans movement is.
And you also always pointed out that the gays had this secret ability to have sleeper cells within all these families in America, and the trans movement is still so vanishingly thin. They didn't have that.
It's a small very, very small percentage of the population, so not as embedded. The secret weapon of our presence in extended families, because people then got to know the gay people that they knew after people came out.
They jumped the divide from live and let live issues, gay marriage. In the end, what do you care if I marry a dude? To issues which then wasn't live and let. It's live, and we're not going to let you live until you live the way we want you to. And then now you start imposing yourself. And like my kids running track, my is a swimmer, and then it's harder.
It's a problem. It's a fault line. It really is. And we're the science people, and the science doesn't seem to be with us on this. But also, like, one of the things we said about gay marriage was we're not going to run out of marriage licenses. It doesn't take anything away from a straight person who wants to get married if a gay person wants to get married. But like scholarships, first place medals, slots on the team, those are finite resources, unlike marriage licenses. And how do we address that honestly? And what we get from, I sometimes think the trans movement is both sides of the mouth. Like, there is no physical advantage that trans men or trans women have over cis women. But also, if there is, inclusion is the greater good and the more important value, which kind of implicitly acknowledges that there might be an advantage. And it's like, there is no trans Vatican Council. There is no trans Pope who can like make rulings on this, just like there was no gay one. But yeah, the trans movement's really on its back feet. And mistakes were made. I believe mistakes were made, and I'm willing to say.
Although, have you seen Conclave?
You want to know? You want to know what grinds?
Right there. Yeah.
What grinds me, Mike?
Goat, Noam?
Okay, first of all, I have two of them. One is instant. Whenever a newspaper article says experts say, That fucking drives me up a wall, because obviously they just called the expert to say whatever it is that they wanted to, which relates to this, which made me think of it. What grinds me is I don't know what to believe anymore. I do not believe the press anymore, and I think I'm right not to believe them. And this started back during Russiagate, when it was, you knew me at the time, when it was 100% clear to me that this was nonsense, this Steele dossier was nonsense, all the complaints about Pfizer were true. There was certainly enough information out there to come to that conclusion years before people begrudgingly began to admit it. But then we saw it later during the Hunter Biden laptop, which we all knew was real, if for no other reason that with the dozens of people who were named on that laptop, not one of them came out and said, that email, that's not my email. I never got that email. I didn't write that email. Not a single person, with all the claim of, and Joe Biden looked into the camera and said, this is a Russian plant. It's a hoax. And the reporters were like, yeah, it's a hoax. Despite the fact they never called up a single person named on the laptop and say, is that your email? So that was, okay, but you could probably explain away those two. But then the ultimate example, and this is like the mirror image of why we have double-blind experiments in science where we know that people can't be trusted. We were told for years that Joe Biden was, the Times said, a super-ager, that he was in tip-top mental health, and that Donald Trump was in cognitive decline. Never mind that Biden spoke for a half an hour a day and was seen being taken by the hand feebly as he walked off of Barack Obama, and Trump would do 15, 16-hour days, and they'd find some slight verbal miscue. And obviously, at this point, I look at the press and say, if you couldn't tell that Joe Biden had a problem and you thought that Trump did have a problem, I can't trust you on anything. Zero. So then now I hear USAID stories where there's going to be, I hope it's not true, taking away AIDS medicine from Africans. This is a fucking outrage if it's true. And I say to myself, how many times have I heard these stories? How many times have they exaggerated or left information out? How many times have they been unable to see exactly what's between their eyes, right in front of their eyes? And there's not an editor in the country who says, Peter Baker and you and you and you, I'm sorry, but you couldn't see what was right before your eyes. I can't use you anymore in the New York Times. You're not, you might be a good writer, you might have good sources, but on the fundamental ability to see what's obviously true, you can't do it. I'm sorry, but you can't work here anymore because they have to restore some credibility. The Times, I know Fox News, but Fox News is like the World Book Encyclopedia. The Times considers itself Encyclopedia Britannica. They're supposed to be reliable.
I just want to jump in defense of journalists and journalism here.
They can't be defended. They can't be defended.
First draft of history, they used to call journalism. And the first draft always needs to be revised because it's not always correct.
You see, you're rationalizing
to hold journalism to the standard of absolute perfection on everything, and you never get played.
Yes, that's what I'm doing. Absolute perfection on everything.
You never get played, then I'm not going to believe anything you have to say. You're succumbing to Bannonism in the flood of shit.
Is that really what you...
This is what they want, us not to believe anything that we read
Did you really take me to be saying they should have absolute perfection on everything? I'm saying for years, we saw a video of Joe Biden in a daze, freezing up, not remembering how his son died. We heard he went before Robert Hur. Robert Hur said the guy can't remember anything. Biden said, we're not releasing the audio of this. I mean, it was piles upon piles. This is why I say compared to the double-blind experiments. You're like the guy,
right.
You're like the scientist who sees the guy who got the placebo always cured. He's got better. I see he's better. It's a psychological flaw, but not everybody has it in the same degree. And obviously, the people who work for the Times and the Washington Post, they're irredeemable. They can't do this job. They should be out. They told us Biden was the best ever. They told us Trump was in cognitive decline. Have you seen any sign of Trump in cognitive decline over the last...
Decline, remember, you got to take into account the baseline. Yeah.
He wandered out of a room the other day, clearly confused about where he was.
Aha!
Like he
now,
yes.
I mean, it's pathetic already. It's pathetic. They are. They should be ashamed.
All I would say is that they wrote those stories about like Biden's fine because clearly people were perceiving that he wasn't, and you could read into those stories.
They found an expert to say he was a super ager. This is why the thing about experts bothered me. The New York Times did a story about Joe Biden, the controversy about his age, and they found this guy. I forget his name. I used to know his name. And he said, "Oh yeah, he's likely a super ager." Come on,
like Kevin Bacon in Animal House. Remain calm. There is no problem. And obviously there was.
So, and if you,
I don't want to defend people who got this so spectacularly wrong. I just don't hold journalists to a standard of you're never allowed to get anything wrong. I don't think there was a conspiracy to cover for Biden. But I don't think there was a conspiracy to cover.
Actually, we do know there was also a little bit of a conspiracy because right after that debate, Carl Bernstein came out and said, "Yeah, there's 14 other examples that we heard about where he froze up like this." And George Clooney said, "Yeah, he was in bad shape in the debate." So there was a kind of conspiracy, maybe the wrong word, but people were covering for him. Probably,
but the same New York Times that you don't want to believe was first out calling for Biden to step down in part because of his age, and that was Ezra Klein in the New York Times very prominently. Yeah. So
when it could no
Peter
longer
Baker, but keep Ezra Klein.
Yeah.
No, he did that like a year and a half. He did that right after the midterms. Yeah. Ezra Klein did. He didn't wait until everybody else.
He did a big, and
he took a lot of
piece
grief
after the Super Bowl, saying if you can't put him on a Super Bowl commercial, sorry, Super Bowl.
And by the way, I'll say I'll make you feel better. Tucker Carlson is obviously mentally ill. He came out and said that he woke up bleeding because he was mauled by demons. Now, if anybody had somebody in their family that woke up bleeding and said they were mauled by demons last night, we would immediately get them psychiatric care. If you went to the hospital emergency room, say, why are you bleeding, Mr. Dworman? Oh, I was mauled by demons. They would say, right this way, we're going to put you under observation. So as I said, I don't expect better from the right. But the right, doesn't hold themselves out that way. The left looks down their nose at everybody.
Is Biden a super ager? Asked medical experts S.J. Olshansky and Dr. Bradley Wilcox, as well as former Texas Lieutenant Governor Ben Barnes. What I want is accountability for them and the people, not the entire institution. I definitely don't think the New York Times is at a place where you can't trust a word in their papers, but accountability for some of the people who have gotten so many things wrong. And two of the big ones you said, the laptop and definitely Biden's age, were credibility defining and destroying examples of the press very much getting it wrong. And I don't think that there's been a reckoning. So it falls to me, and it increases my cognitive load, to seek out the sources that I do trust. And I do trust Bloomberg. I will also read it critically, but I'm more likely to trust an article in Bloomberg than I am, say, definitely the Huffington Post and maybe even the Washington Post. And I do trust Times of Israel, and I do trust the Savage Lovecast, and I do trust, and I do.
Even though the first time I wrote about the clitoris, I put it in the wrong place. So I've made mistakes.
Do you mean in the wrong paragraph in your essay, or?
But
wrong anatomical location. It's not on the soft palate. That's just where mine is, and I made a deal there.
I do want to say, I know you got to go, but just repeating myself, but it's worth it that we all saw Biden clearly out of it, clearly in a way that anybody in our family, even had one of those moments, would be extremely worried. And I think even though there was some covering up for him, I don't think that was really what it was. What it was a psychological inability to see what was true because they hated Trump so much. And it was laid bare for us, and we're still, even at this late stage, because we might also hate Trump, failing to react to it for what it actually was, which was a huge scandal. Huge scandal in terms of corruption, huge scandal in terms of somebody being not qualified for the job.
I actually completely agree with you, but I don't think they hated Trump or feared Trump enough. I think it was narcissism. Biden loved Biden too much to hate Trump and see the danger in sticking around.
Right, or saying if we're...
Evident. It's why people, when Biden first ran, people were like, be one termer, and he hinted he would be. Because we all kind of knew that he would be too old. Yeah. And Trump is going to be older than Biden is now at the end of his next term. Fuck the gerontocracy. I want age limits on members of Congress, Senate, Supreme Court and president.
And
you can't be over 75 and be a bishop in the Catholic Church. You shouldn't be over 75 and the president of the United States.
And look, if these organizations got it wrong, and they did, let's remember the ones who got it right, the writers who got it right, and give them our traffic, our attention, and our credence. Alex Thompson of Axios got it right. He was pursuing this aggressively. The team of writers from the Wall Street Journal, including Annie Linsky, she definitely got it right. She was assailed. On my show, when I talked about, well, it seems like Robert Hur is certainly writing some very concerning things, and many listeners say, why are you buying the talking points of the Republicans? Wait, am I putting myself in that category? I am saying that there are sources out there. We just have to do a little more work, and it's taking all of our cognitive load. But they're out there, and they're redeemable. I want to thank,
and some of them, like Ezra Klein, are in the New York.
I want to thank.
Even today, I read Peter Baker describing what Trump said about Ukraine, how you shouldn't have started the war to begin with. And then I went back and watched the video, and he did say something like that.
He did,
but it wasn't quite the way.
Yeah, it wasn't
Peter
clear
Baker
if he was
described it.
making that as here is my theory on the war, or just there was a word salad-y element, and. And
also his body language was like you could tell it didn't come out quite the way he meant it. He kind of meant like.
But then why are we working overtime to help him?
He made it transparently clear in his Truth Social post where he blamed Ukraine for starting the war and blamed
I didn't read that. That may be a different issue. I'm just saying that again. You just see this.
Okay, to the trustworthiness.
Like I could have written that. I believe maybe it's just my own ego, and I could have criticized Trump in it and also said. But he was a little awkward. It's not clear 100% if it came out the way he wanted to, but he was blaming Ukraine. Like it seems like Baker is incapable of seeing what really went on. And it's always in the same direction.
We got to end it there. I want to thank my guest, Dan Savage, of the longest-running sex advice columnist in existence, of the longest-running sex advice column, Savage Love, and, of course, the podcast, the Savage Lovecast. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Mike.
And Noam Dworman of, I think we're obligated to say, the world-famous Comedy Cellar.
No, you don't have to.
Okay, but, this is what we think. And his podcast, Live from the Table. Thank you, Noam.
You're welcome. Thank you.